I guess I'll start. It's not really a complicated position to have, I suppose. So I guess it's better if I set things up by giving a framework of what I mean by necessarily suffering. So when I use the phrase suffering, I'm using the reference point of generally things that don't go well in life and will cause you pain. So this could be physical pain, or mostly, primarily, is what we're talking about. Is I reckon is emotional pain. And by emotional pain, I don't just mean heartbreak. I mean things not going well for you, and things that might somehow, you would argue, cause mental pressure on you as a person. Uh, so we could say, to sum it up, things that don't go well for you and cause you mental pain or mental pressure or mental stress. This is what I'm reckoning by suffering. Obviously, for physical pain, I reckon that's a way easier thing to hash out. We can get into it if you want. So the reason that it is necessary is, to put it simply, you need some sort of navigation through the world for your nurturement as a person. And I would argue that suffering is actually very, very beneficial for you, because usually when things don't go well for you in life, when you are suffering on a personal level or on a mental level or a psychological level, that generally means that you have to sit down and see where you're going wrong or right. And if we as a society or as a community or whatever, if we try to eliminate these factors, it is basically very equal to disabling a GPS that you have on your car, or not being able to see clearly where you're going. Uh, of course, this is not the case for all the time, but usually, suffering in life tells you that you need to do something about it, or maybe you need to relook at your options, or there is something wrong. There's some sort of, let's say, incompatibility. And that is not to say that you should actively go and seek suffering, obviously. But the thing about suffering in life is that it usually happens whether you like it or not, because life is usually quite complicated and difficult to navigate. And suffering and, like, just mental pain and pressure are one of those things where, eventually, you will face it in some format. And one could even make the case that if you resolve that, if you overcome that, it is actually very beneficial for you in the long run. So that is my argument for why suffering is necessary. I don't think I've left anything out, so I'm gonna leave it open to Doomer.
Um, I'll just say that the reason why I argue in the negative is because, as someone that has experienced a lot of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and as knows a lot about, yeah, a lot of, bad stuff that has gone on in society for a long, long time, I can say for sure that whilst sometimes, yes, suffering can help, I don't think it's very necessary, and I think it actually most of the time hurts you,
Mm-hmm.
especially if the suffering. If you're brought up in a childhood where you suffer and you are abused, or something is going on that you're getting hurt emotionally or mentally or physically, you're gonna have sometimes you may actually improve, but a lot of the time, especially in my experience,
Mm-hmm.
you haven't improved. And it takes not suffering, but actual support from outside areas where you may not even request the support. You don't. For example, in my experience, um, I never seeked support. Uh, Someone gave me the support because they saw that my life was going down the drain, and was very, very, like, my all of my life was just breaking at that point. And
Right.
yes, and this is probably why I believe in suffering is not necessary. And yeah, so I think helping people and actually doing good for people, helping, I think actually helping people could actually help more than just suffering. Because if you help people and you stop
Mhm.
dwelling on your suffering, then your suffering will go away. But and you don't need to say, well, that was necessary. You can say, well, the helping other people weren't necessary. And I know that's a bit of a convoluted argument, but you get the gist that I do believe that sometimes it's help, but I also believe that most of the time, especially when it happens at a very young age, it
Right.
really hurts you, and sometimes it leads to suicide. And there's a lot of other points, but I will talk about that after you, psychologist.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, those are fair. Of course, yeah, we can't really know that in what situations it is productive. So and in what situations it is unproductive. So it's going to be very difficult to argue in which situations you would it's better off if you remove the suffering, and in which situations you would better off leaving it as it is. And that's primarily because to not to take it to a weird place, but this timeline is all we have, right? So the end
Yeah.
result that we get, you can't really cross compare it with another universe to say like, okay, well, suffering didn't really do anything for that guy, or in either scenario, you would get so like if you have a person A, and if let's say person A is traumatized in early childhood, we really don't have access to a parallel world where person A isn't traumatized to cross compare the two case studies, right? So that is absolutely correct in the sense that, like, yeah, in some cases you may not necessarily need suffering, but you have to be more specific on what do you mean by suffering exactly. And then another point that you have to make clear is, okay, do we in which areas do we really want to remove suffering? So there probably in certain areas I would agree with you, even though I might be wrong. And in certain other areas I might disagree with you. So for example, to give you an example, uh, some would argue that self-discipline as like a life habit isn't necessarily nice, especially if it's doing something you really abhor. It would literally be almost close to suffering, although not in that exaggerated sense. But like there are subject matters where if I'm forced to read it, or if I'm forced to deal with a person, it would literally be it would cost an insane amount of mental energy for me. But you could argue that that suffering is beneficial in the long run. So I guess to put it simply, one major point where I would say I am for suffering is that we really don't necessarily know where it can turn into a positive situation as opposed to a negative situation. Same thing goes for like experiences with PTSD, trauma at early childhood. You might argue that yes, it is horrible that a person A is forced to deal with an insane amount of trauma, insane confusion. I have personally lost huge portions of like my young age, very productive age, just because mentally I was not in the right place. But when I think back, I think maybe okay, if I didn't do that huge mistake, if I didn't suffer that way, then maybe my resolution wouldn't be as great. Because personally, I would argue because of that, I'm on a self-actualized path of living. Whereas if I didn't have that uh, minor portion of suffering, I wouldn't be here right now. So you have to be specific on what type of suffering you mean per se. There is certainly argument to be made where each goes, but generally, if you're arguing for complete removal of suffering in all cases, Well, obviously, I think that's not a good idea. A and B, that is not also very practical.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, I do not believe it. Well, it's probably impossible to remove suffering. I mean, there's always going to be, there's always
Right.
going to be evil in the world, and evil's going to make people suffer. And
Exactly.
there's always going to be, some people are just going to be mean to you and that inflict some emotional suffering a lot of the
Hmm.
time. Uh, but what I do believe is, I guess, in a sense, it's much more of a philosophical argument of what I believe in,
Oh,
not necessarily
right.
a practical argument, like an argument that could be based on the real world. Because obviously, obviously, if you're going to argue that suffering is, you can just completely remove it. Well,
Right.
that's impossible. But
Yeah.
you can argue that it's not necessary, and that is my argument. And also, I just want to say my definition of suffering is similar to yours. Is emotional, mental pain. I would
Mm.
say I would say the majority of the time it's inflicted by someone of a higher power or authority than you. So, for example,
Ah,
a relative, or your parents, or your teacher, or even the
right.
state, or even like the police, stuff like that. That they
Yeah.
can all inflict some type of suffering onto an
Mm.
individual. Um, and my point is, for example, let's dissect what the state could do.
Right.
I not believe in, for example, the death penalty.
Right.
I do not believe in excessive use of the police when there's no need to. I just believe in the police doing their job, and that's it, and just catching the evil, and not targeting those that say something bad online, for example. I don't believe
Yeah.
they should suffer, and I do believe that help instead of making them suffer, especially even for criminals. I'm quite I can't pronounce that, but
Yeah.
rehabilitative.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Basically, yeah, that basically, I'm quite that because I do believe a lot of the time. Well, I'm a Christian. I believe that God doesn't make everyone evil. I believe God, when you are born, you are made good, and then you turn to evil. And
Right.
that's because like your demons, like depression, mental health issues, and stuff like that. And I think honestly, sometimes we need to think, why do people murder people? Why do people rape people? Are they
Hmm.
mentally ill? And we seem to forget this argument that they're still human, and whilst we don't want them to be, they still exist, and they'll still have a presence on this planet. Even if we kill them, they'll still be around as matter. So you can't destroy their entire existence. So
Life.
we need to help them, and
Yeah.
that's for the state. I do believe that you may say, well, being in prison is suffering, but I say that if we help those that's obviously not mentally well,
Yeah.
if they're going to hurt others, obviously it's something's wrong with them. So I
Yeah.
do believe that not that neuters any type of suffering. Plus, um, uh, for example, let's say parents can abuse their children. I know we've touched on this, but I'll just say, like, I do believe that only in experiences of mine, and I've talked to a lot of other people as well, experiences. Well, no, suffering only ends when you have external help. Uh, if you don't say anything, which most of the time children don't like to say what if they're being abused, because others don't understand it. So
Yeah.
they need an external source to help them. And honestly, and honestly, I there was a lot of evidence to say that getting therapy, not just saying, not just living out it and just just waiting for it to just for you to be acclimatized to the fact that what that's what happened to you. Just you just felt okay, that's what happened to me. I'll improve. A lot of that
Yeah,
time that doesn't work. Most of the time
absolutely.
it's external help and therapy and stuff like that. That other people have to help you.
Yes,
Teachers as well. They can, and also like bosses. I mean, they can inflict suffering. I mean, if they fire you. Now I'm
absolutely.
economically left wing, so I guess
Yeah.
we can say I say that a lot of the time, bosses they sometimes fire people based on greed and profit. Now, that is, I do believe that one way to remove that type of suffering is to limit the profit motive, which I guess is one argument. But
Sorry, you said they fired him based on what? I didn't catch that.
what did it say? What did it say?
Bosses fire people based on what?
Fire people based on like a profit motive. Like, for example, they are
Oh,
making, like, for example, they may
enough money.
make like a smaller profit.
Right, right, yeah,
Well,
yeah. Mhm.
be really big profit. But that type of
Yeah.
suffering is not necessary, and you shouldn't inflict it on to someone just because you just want a bigger profit. I mean, you already gain a bigger profit, but I think
Right.
everyone knows that bosses, and employers, they want a big profit
Mhm.
because then their company, they in their opinion,
Right.
they can get richer and then they can get more stuff for themselves, for their materialistic
Right.
goals, and you know that type of suffering is not necessary. So the state, in my opinion, this state inflicting suffering is not necessary because there is evidence out there that suggests that there is that helping people, whilst maybe detaining them,
Mhm.
helping people, not killing people, even if they commit a violent crime, for example,
Right.
and and also, for example, with the parent situation, I honestly, in them three scenarios, which I guess are the majority of the scenarios where suffering is inflicted, I do believe that, and self-discipline. I'm just gonna say,
Mhm.
I'm gonna be pessimist about this. A lot of people don't
Right.
do that. A lot of people really don't do that. So it's nothing. It's not really like it, a tiny number of people are willing to inflict suffering on themselves. So that's why I've not really gone on to that, because I do believe it's quite a small piece of the massive uh
Yeah. Puzzle.
suffering.
Yeah. Right. So, and there's definitely stuff there that I agree. So, like, one of the reasons that I'm infatuated with psychology is that in terms of crime, we still don't know precisely what is it that drives a person towards crime. So once we figure that out, assuming that we do, of course, then yes, you would get less you would get less amount of people's lifetime being wasted. So, assuming you can categorize and identify the reasoning for those, and then if you determine if these individuals are capable of, contributing to society or being free of certain mental illness, getting treatment, etc. You would definitely figure those out. And I would also like to point out that I'm not saying that necessarily the way to quote unquote unlock genius is to suffer. That's not something that I would say I 100% agree with. But again, the thing is, we do not have a cross reference model for now. So, for example, let's say we hear the tale of somebody suffers a lot in their life, there's a lot of trauma, but then in the result of that, they turn into someone who is extremely talented, prodigy, genius, etc. And many people make the case that because of that, obviously, you're suffering. I do agree with that to a certain extent, but that does not mean that there are other ways to get that people, like to get that person, involve them in certain activities where those talent would equally flourish. The issue is that we don't know what leads to that high level of achievement and self-actualization is one of my many positions. If we have cross-reference models, we can probably determine which is which, but we don't know that. In on the case of more of these specific practical examples that you mentioned, like for example, companies. Well, of course, you do have bullies at school. You do have bosses who are necessarily like jerks and so on. But I would argue that in those cases, I'm a free market type of guy. So assuming you do have a certain say on culture as a whole. So yes, your boss can be mean and they can fire you for a higher margin of profit. But then you'd have to ask yourself, a lot of people get fired plenty of times, so it is probably a good idea to uh, develop some emotional resistance, or sort of get more assertive about that. The reason that people most of the time get fired is that there are a lot of reasons, but in the example that you mentioned, the boss that requires a higher margin of profit, so he disposes of you like a disposable person, so to speak. That
Human
boss,
resources.
yeah, human resource, yeah, exactly, like a disposable person. Uh,
Mm.
in that case, that boss will surely suffer if his assessment is wrong. So what I'm saying is, if you if you are doing the best you can and that boss is wrong and he cannot increase the margin of profit, that shows that you're incompatible with that mindset. So it's probably a good thing that he fires you. You don't want to work under somebody who is not compatible with you as a person. And it is my belief that eventually you will end up finding an employee in a working place that is more suited to your temperament, or you'll say, okay, maybe I could do better, and you'll step up your game. So in terms of instances like this where you have a lot of variables, I would definitely say I am not in favor of removing suffering. I would actually allow that boss to be as big of a jerk as he wants, because eventually he's going to shoot himself in the leg, be alienated, or end up working with people who are more compatible with him. And you're out of there, you'll get less emotional abuse, and you will find a workplace where it is more suited to your talents. So I think we agree on like the general framework of suffering. In more specific cases, of course, you could do more. Actually, that boss that is being mean who's firing you for the sake of being mean, he could actually use some advice. You could maybe sit him down and say like, okay, you're being a dumbass. Like, this guy is doing the best he can. And certainly in some cases, maybe that employee certainly needs to go. The assessment is up for the person who is in charge, right? Uh, but again, that is another showcase of maybe if that boss fires you, you're forced to again sit down, have a real good look at yourself, and maybe find a better job, or maybe develop in some other ways. I'm not in favor of a society that is run basically on feelings being hurt, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean, like, feelings are important. Certainly, feelings are definitely important, but efficiency is certainly achievable if you have a system that individuals are more compatible with each other. Because when you're usually compatible with each other, up to a reasonable degree, of course, I would always encourage you to develop your skills, be more assertive, be psychologically resilient, and all that stuff. But people have a limit. That limit is a little bit abstract, but assuming you do develop that, and if you do reach there, you're eventually gonna find. I heard this in an interview. I really like this phrase. You're eventually gonna find your tribe, and this is your tribe in your family life, in your career, and then you will reach a level of self-actualization that is going to make you realize, okay, everything that I've been through before this was actually quite worth it. On the subject of therapy, of course, I'm studying psychology myself. Many of the therapy methods are actually very inefficient, and we have a lot of bad therapists. I know a lot of them. They're called my classmates. Some of them are really genuinely have no idea what they're talking about. So when they go out, God help their patients, you know. But yeah, but again, we are hopefully moving towards a place where you wouldn't even need a therapist, or if you do visit one, because see, we do have bad therapists. So imagine the average of all therapists in 2021. Even the worst one is doing a better job than the one that was functioning in 1951. That is primarily because the methods that we teach are better. So even if you get someone who is very incompetent, and if you compare them in the time frame, the one that is operating in 2021 has certainly higher methods of helping out. But that is besides the point. Absolutely. I would rather you not have to go to a therapist and accidentally see someone who, or meet someone who saves you from your suffering. But the thing is, there is benefit to that suffering, it seems. We may reach a point where we're able to know exactly how we can remove needless suffering, which is a phrase I really like. I am not for needless suffering. If we reach a point where we can distinguish, okay, these are the ones that you kind of need, like self-discipline, which again, I understand if you're not necessarily for that, but there are objectively people who are very self-disciplined. So they're willing to like torture themselves for 1 hour and then,
I just got to say
get
something
them.
real quick. You guys have like
Go on, yeah.
5 minutes left.
Okay, no, I'm almost done. So there are people like that who do exist, but my point is we have no way of distinguishing needless suffering from just suffering. I'm going to leave it open to Doomer, and then I reckon we can go to questions.
So I just want to say, first of all, well, I would say in some circumstances you could say some like in a way with the way that for example Twitter works, in a way like an employee where you have to improve their company, as in you have to improve the content and grow the content of that company. If you log in or make an account, you sign a contract. And in for example, in that scenario, I mean, I think you will agree with me. Jack is not a very good employer, is he? If we're gonna use that type of like we are all employees of Jack from Twitter. He's not a very good employer, is he? Like
Yes.
he's making us suffer for our speech now. That in that way, it's like it's like kind of like what a state is like. If a state is pressing speech, you're suffering because you just said something bad or mean. Which honestly, whilst it may sound like I may support that, I don't. I think there's a better way, a much more like a cultural development change that we could do to lower the amount of like bullies in this world. But honestly, I don't think you can completely remove it because that's very naive. But
Absolutely.
but I think that's the worldview that Jack has, and like he thinks that he can stop bullying and ban everyone that he finds offensive, and that's making people suffer. Now, in my opinion, that's not necessary, and in a way, that's like being a very, very bad employer, and he's making, like to be honest, I believe everyone should just quit and go somewhere else. But sometimes it's very impossible. You mentioned that you can just change. For example, in that scenario where you have a business that gives you a good paid job, but your boss is very nasty prick, he's going to. He's obviously, like, you're probably not going to change your job. I mean, if we ever have a poll that says, "Would you change your job if your boss was a prick?" I bet you 90% of the at least in the UK, 9% would say no, I wouldn't change my job, and that's because a lot of people are stuck in that kind of situation. So, I mean, you can say in this, like, because I don't agree with free markets. I mean, that can be a different debate for another time. But I just believe that a lot of workers are stuck in their job, and there's a reason why a lot of there's a reason why a lot of the working class can't move up the ladder. It's mostly
Right.
because their bosses don't, their bosses give a good enough pay to keep them in the job, but not a good enough pay to improve and go up in classes. And there's another problem. I think you were talking about how like bad therapists. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
there's always going to be bad people. There's always going to be bad, incompetent people that shouldn't be in a position of helping people. And maybe, and you also said the actual getting therapy may actually. Did you say like it's actually proving that suffering?
Well,
Actually
I'm
addressed
saying
them?
the average therapist in
1 minute left.
2021, like the most incompetent therapist in 2021, is way better than an incompetent therapist in 1951, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I understand that argument, but what I do believe is that sometimes sometimes in my opinion, like if you didn't have that external support, and you just tried your best to get some help, not someone interfering and trying to get you to help, trying to give you help. And there's a reason why people say, "Please just accept my help." You're. For example, someone's gonna jump off a bridge, and people say, "Don't jump, I will help you." Like they're
Yeah.
demanding, like, kind of basically demanding that they will help you. They're saying, "I will help you now. Stop! Don't jump off the bridge." That's basically what they're saying. Like, your type of suffering in that situation is never gonna. If you try to just go with it and go with the suffering and just try to in this mindset say this will get better, you're probably gonna just jump off anyway.
Yeah.
And I do believe that an external support, which is I wish I had, but yeah, if
Time's
an
up,
external
but you
support
could wrap it up.
would probably help better than suffering in many situations. Anyway, Esther, you said something, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just saying, like, the time's up and it's time to, like, wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah. That's fine. Well. Well, yeah. For the whole free market argument, I reckon we could do like a whole maybe part 2 or something like that. But like it is generally not like a bad thing in my opinion if you do not have the buffer for like hurting or suffering to just not involve yourself in certain areas. So a big part of not suffering is also knowing where your limits are and not necessarily getting involved. So that's another aspect of that. I guess that's enough. Let's go to the next section.
Okay, so thank you guys. So polite.
Yeah, sure.
So patient. Never had to
Come on.
interrupt. Beautiful.
It's me. Come on.
So Towering had a question and then he left the voice chat. Okay.
Oh.
If anybody has a question, just ping me right now in the formal debate text chat and I will read it out loud. But Towering had a question and then he decided to leave just now.
Damn. That's a shame.
Other than that, actually, let me check one thing. Okay, perfect. If anybody wants to be unmuted to just like continue the conversation right now, you can just let me know and ping. Other than that, if no one pings me, then I guess this whole thing is over, and it was beautiful.
These voices are all you hear. Yeah.
Towering left at the worst time. Like, seriously. Like,
Literally.
he reacted to have a question, and then I'm like, okay, what's your question? And he's not even here. So, I received a ping. Okay, Sam wants to be unmuted. Hello, Sam.
Okay.
Hi, Sam.
Wait,
Greetings.
No, sorry. I was pinging you to get your attention so that Hemen could be unmuted.
Who?
Oh yeah, my friend.
Hemen.
Come on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hemen? That's your friend?
Yeah. It's a Kurdish
okay.
name, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you said.
Hi, yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I should
it's
have
fine,
mentioned.
yeah.
Hi,
Yeah,
hi,
Sorry
everyone.
about that, Sam.
How are
Thank
you?
you.
No, you're sorry, I should have mentioned. Well, the thing that I wanted to add somehow to the conversation is, I think, the thing that Psych mentioned, and that's how you define suffering. Because it seems to me that the word suffering, yes, it's a bit of a strong word, but if you think of something like difficulty, you could easily think of biology, in which all of us, because of our immune systems, we need difficulty. We every day need to be in contact with microbes and bacteria.
Exactly.
So yeah, we would be actually build up this reactive system that helps us in the long run. So actually, maybe it's the word suffering that sounds a bit emotional and a little bit chronic. But the thing is that exactly, again, because of biology, you can also have the type of difficulty that can harm you, and also you can have the type of difficulty that benefits you. For instance,
Yeah.
in exercising, if you exercise for a short time, you actually encourage your body to secrete uh, more hormones that are related to building up,
Yeah.
like insulin growth factor hormone. But if you do it for more than an hour, that heavy exercise, you will actually secrete cortisol, which will actually, destroy your muscles. So it's very important to recognize that sweet spot that, as Nietzsche said, that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Because sometimes there are things that don't necessarily kill you, but they make you not living also, like that bus that Doomer talked about. So I think the necessity of the suffering, the definition of the suffering can actually be the thing that could answer the question, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Great point.
Does anyone want to add
Love
to
it.
that?
Well, not really. He's pretty much summed it up perfectly. Yeah. So basically, your immune system needs to suffer as well, if you think about it that way.
Exactly, like
Yeah.
allergy.
Interesting. Yeah.
Did Doomer leave?
Yeah, I
Oh,
think,
there-
to be honest, my argument is not like I don't deny I don't deny the existence of suffering. It's not that. It's not. Or it's not. I don't like. It's I don't want something to not exist in a realistic practical sense, because that will mean that, oh yeah, we won't have microbes, we won't have immune system. But it's a much more of a philosophical sense of like mental, emotional, not really, biological, like your immune system. Because I think that is important.
And it also applies. It also applies. And for instance, today I was watching Jonathan Haidt talking about his book Coddling the American
Minds, right?
Mind. Yeah, currently American Mind. Yeah, and he exactly talks about the culture of raising children, something that also George Carlin made fun of. That
Yeah.
if you try to raise your children in a quiet and comfortable situation, you have actually harmed them, because they are not able to cope with the hardship. Yeah, hardship is a much better word here. The hardship that society would inevitably and finally make them be faced with. So if you try to face them with, say, punishment, the consequence of an adventurous thought you had, you little kiddo, you must be punished, so you know that you're harming someone else. And if that kid is left unpunished, which I actually have the example in our family, that's going to be a hell for everyone. It's going to be very painful. But most of all to the child himself, not just because we're going to, like, I don't know, like raise a bad person who thinks that he can do whatever he does. It's actually the bad, not actually a bad person, but he has been unlucky to have a bad parentship. The person is going to be hurt the most because they're not prepared mental. For example, that boss to fire
Yeah.
him, and he's not able to say, well, like, he defend himself basically. So it also, I think, applies in mentality and emotionalities.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have about 15 minutes left, and somebody wanted to ask Big Gun Ben. Thank you for your question. What would become of humans without suffering?
Oh, go on.
In my opinion, whilst I guess in an idealistic sense it might be good, in a realistic sense we may just be acclimatized to not see evil. Now, again, it's much more philosophical because, as a conservative, in my opinion, you can't really base a policy off of something that's idealistic. You need to base it off something that is tried and tested and it is realistic and work. And in my opinion, my opinions on economics and stuff like that. So, that in my opinion, it's much more of a philosophical argument, and obviously it's more detached than politics. And in my opinion, it wouldn't be good if it was implemented in the real world, but if, for example, it was implemented in a head where it's just, it's all fun and you can get the idealistic sense of what you want, yeah.
Right.
Did he cut out?
I
Is
think
it
so,
just
yeah.
me, or we
I
can't
thought
hear
he
you,
was on my
Boomer?
end. Yeah, he cut out, I think.
I think leaving the room and coming back might help. Right.
Yeah, do that. Like, disconnect
I
and
don't
then
know
hop
if
back
you
in,
can
I guess.
hear. Oh, there we go.
Okay. I guess he did. Okay, can you...
Nope, we can't hear
Uh-huh.
you.
He's
Nope.
lighting up green, but he's not.
Yeah.
I can't hear him if
Yeah.
he's talking.
He's suffering.
Yeah, he's suffering. Take two.
Oh, we all are, yeah.
Nope.
Nope.
We are having some technical difficulties. Give us a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Do the thing, like, like... like just
Standby
cut that
music.
in the video. Very fun. Okay, I guess I'll also like say something until like Doomer cuts back in. So I think even idealistically that would be a very, very dull direction, because I think one of the major factors that contribute to suffering is the fact that human beings are fundamentally different. So if you offer one path that offers even in a philosophical sense or in a practical sense, if you offer just one simple way, you're gonna get a lot of people actually suffering, because it is people who are different and wouldn't necessarily fit in that framework. So if you reach this one one mythological way of living that offers no suffering, I think that is not going to allow individuals to actually flourish, because to take it back to what I originally said, one of the primary functions of, like, even pain, suffering, failure, all these negative emotions, is that it basically tells you where you fit on the map, where you fit on the puzzle. So you can tell this by, if you listen to an interview or if you talk to someone who has reached some level of success, but they're also enjoying what they're doing, you can actually tell that even though still they're on a high position, they're successful, the job is still not 100% enjoyment and no suffering. There's still headache, blah blah blah. It is actually a very good place of equilibrium. There is actual balance there, and I don't think you can reach that without trying a little bit, having some failures, kind of like dating, where you date a couple of people, some of them don't match, some of them do, and then eventually through that you figure yourself out, and you find out what makes you different, then you can commit.
I'm back, by the way.
Yeah, go on.
Great.
Yeah. So basically, I was on about how, like, it's basically like my position is like it's basically what, like, in theory communism would be, and it's that in my opinion, you're never gonna get a very perfect society with no suffering. So that's basically my answer. I should have just said that, to be honest. But,
One question. Sorry.
It's basically, my opinion is like communism. It's basically communism in philosophy.
Right. Oh my god, that's even more horrifying than actual communism.
There's a question from Big Gun Ben again. This is directly for a psychologist.
Right.
He wants to know what level of human suffering should be tolerated.
Oh, that is a very good question. So there is the classical question where we go like genius person stuff. Like, I think it's Beethoven who immensely suffered, but that led to great music. So some people ask, like, would you be willing to remove the suffering if it meant that he produced no great music? So, like, you kind of look at it at a trade-off. That's a great question. I personally think, based on like the people I've met in real life and like the people that I've read about, is that majority of the suffering that is endured by great people is actually more of their own choice. So what I mean by that is they don't settle for mediocrity. They're more curious. They go forward more. They suffer more. Sometimes it could be like anatomical defect, but I still think the talent plays a part in the amount of suffering they can absorb. If somebody comes to me and tells me, like, okay, what's the formula? I would recommend that they know their own limits, because some people have big ideas. Some people are ambitious. They don't know their own limits, so they end up breaking themselves. And this is actually something that is one of the main reasons that I'm more on the conservative side of things, is that some people don't recognize this. Some people don't respect certain traditions that are set there for a reason, and then they somehow ambitiously go forward and they break those limits, and they end up getting hurt up onto a point where that person needs insane amount of therapy to recover. So I would say it depends on the person. Firstly, they should know how far they can take it. How far they can take it before they gain something in return.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Sam, Green Eggs and Ham, wants to be unmuted. Oh, wait, Doomer, did you want to say something? Because I know Sam wants to hop in and ask a question. Oh no, he's cutting out again.
No, again. Yeah.
It's okay, take your time.
Yeah,
honestly. I'm gonna unmute Sam really quick, because Sam's question is directly for Psych. So in the meantime, Doomer, fix your Wi-Fi connection, please. Sam, you're unmuted.
Go on, Sam.
Oh no.
Oh, you're also roboting. No. Okay, it's better now. Go
on. Because
Sam.
Oh my god.
Sam. This is not. This must be like all of Europe right now, because I know they're both in Europe. Sam, you're
Yeah, someone is Someone turning people in Europe into robots.
Somebody said,
And
when did Sam become Stephen Hawking? And that's so messed up. But Sam, try
Can you
try
maybe type
joining.
it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sam, this is not working out. I'm gonna need you to type your question. Okay. Okay. Hello?
Come on. Oh no.
Sam, I'm like literally in tears right now. This is. I think he's gonna type it.
Yeah,
Please type it because this is too much right now.
How does his avatar do the thing where even his background is green? I'm kind of jealous about that. How does that work? Still can't hear you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm gonna ping him because I don't know if he can hear us at all. I'm gonna say, dude.
Oh no, you're also. Oh, what is going on with
Me?
Discord?
Is it the same like mine? Is it like
No,
that?
you're
No,
good.
you're perfect. Yeah.
I
It's
thought this
solely
only
Europe right
happens
now.
to people from Middle East, you know?
Yeah, it's like
Kind of
downturn
embarrassing to be happy to see other people suffer, but it's happening to me.
It's the downturn of Western civilization. Your internet is like.
Or maybe it's because of Discord.
It could
I
be
think so.
Discord, European Discord or something, because I think I'm fine and you guys are fine. Okay, his question is, it occurs to me that I might be asking a question quite similar to that of Big Gun Ben's, but I'm interested to know what kind of suffering you consider to be necessary / acceptable.
Aha. So basically, character building suffering. Sufferings that help you reach self-actualization.
So he said, sorry, he also added, for the sake of argument, let's look past subjective aspects.
Oh, well, that would be very, very difficult to move past by at this point, because if you basically turn it into numbers or objective measurement, there is no difference between pain except that the result that it leads to. So even in that case, let me rephrase that. Maybe there is an objective point to it where if you look at it in some sort of economical trade-off. So you suffer, what do you gain? And you can measure that. I mean, not as objectively as you'd like, but it's still measurable. Like a success story, you know, even though, like, let's say somebody might lie, but we could argue that actual success stories do exist, and that is an objectively measurable thing where, yes, the person suffered, but it led to a great gain. Especially if that gain is not just limited to the person itself, but if they rise out of poverty, they form a good family, their children are well taken care of, etc. So, objectively speaking, you can still measure it. It's not as easy to talk about as the subjective side of things, but it is still measurable. And the definition is a suffering that leads to a greater gain. You could limit that to the person's lifetime. Although you can extend it further even. But that's where I would draw the line.
Alrighty then. Oh, he says, I see. Thank you for your answer. How kind.
Sure.
Thank you for your question, Sam. And
yeah, thank you. And he has a great voice. I love Sam's voice. I was very curious.
All I heard was Stephen Hawking, so I don't know.
No, before that. He spoke before that.
Oh, yeah. He did for a little.
Yeah.